afternoon, everyone, and I am Maxine Henry Wilson. I am a member of the CCEP organizational group, and our next panel is going to talk about some of the immediate and future considerations for greater sustainability and inclusivity based on our experiences of COVID-19, and will focus on educational policy and support systems. We have 5 panelists, and I will introduce them as they are about to make their presentations. I'm going to emphasize that we need to contain our presentations to 5 minutes, and we will be monitoring because we want everyone to get a chance, not just to present, but also for us to have discussion, questions and answers. So we have here this morning. We'll start with Mr. Gordon, Mr. Rafa Gordon. I think you corrected how your name was pronounced. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Mr. Gordon is the Senior Technical Specialist for Education of the Education Development Management Unit of the OECS Commission. His particular interests are the imperatives of the OECS education sector strategy and its cross-cutting themes such as teacher quality and teacher professional development. He is a former curriculum specialist with responsibility for English with the Ministry of Education, St. Lucia, and specializes in literacy and language study. He also has a great level of competence and fluency in Spanish. Mr. Gordon, your presentation, please.
Good morning to all. Thank you, Madam Moderator. A special thanks to the committee for allowing the OECS Commission an opportunity to share in this presentation and this wonderful exercise. The OECS is guided by the revised Treaty of Bastia, and the OECS Commission as one of the organs of that organization has a mandate that focuses on harmonization of systems, coordinating the efforts by the various member states, and mobilizing resources to be able to meet the needs of the member states as well. So essentially, it is a case of bringing our various member states together to be able to benefit each other with the resources that are available. The challenges imposed upon us by the COVID-19 situation are many. They're very varied. Just to touch on a few of them here, quality of instruction is certainly an issue that needs to be closely monitored. It needs to be considered carefully. While we have teachers who are very competent and who are very skilled, very creative, who have shown their mettle and have responded to the challenges imposed by COVID, there are others who do not have the requisite training, experience, the expertise, or the will in some cases to be able to respond to the needs that have been identified. And so certainly there are issues with what level and quality of instruction children are being exposed to. There are also challenges in monitoring the instruction to assure quality. Finances are also a challenge. They very much relate to access and equity. There are some persons who are able to connect with the online learning, others are not able to, either because they do not have devices or they do not have connectivity. And in some cases, you may have a family where 3 or 4 children are operating on just one device. And so automatically it affects the ability of each child to participate. In those circumstances, we're finding that the younger ones have less access than the older ones. There's the burden of the new, that is that persons were not prepared for this pandemic and for the implications. There's also the reality that many of the teachers who are expected to meet the needs of children have children of their own, and they have to monitor and manage those children. They have to support the children's instruction in the home. And so it poses a serious burden on those educators. There's the issue of managing expectations. The expectations may not always be ideal, or they may not always be realistic. And those expectations span the entire system, from the Ministry of Education down to schools, parents, and the public. Persons may think that learning from home should function in one particular way, but these may not necessarily meet the realities or what evidence demonstrates. And of course, monitoring and evaluation is quite a challenge, because the space is a totally new one, and people monitoring people in so many different spaces online is really a challenge. In terms of the response to the COVID-19 situation, the Education Development Management Unit of the OECS Commission has developed a regional strategy in collaboration with the various ministries of education that has 4 focus areas. The first one deals with harmonization of policy response amongst member states. And we recognize that because this is largely a novel environment, we need to consider the policy implications to ensure that structures are in place to provide the relevant support. We have undertaken a rapid assessment of learning management systems, because there were very limited controls on exactly what was happening. There's also an academic recovery program that we are presently designing to be able to meet the needs of students who are most affected by the pandemic. The focus area 2 is a transition to distributed learning. We're looking at devices and not just online learning, but looking at distributed learning, so that we're considering all of the modalities that children can use, or teachers can use, to provide the adequate quality educational experiences for students. We're talking about personalized learning, web learning. We're talking also about using applications, so that when children are not connected to the internet, learning can continue. Mixing that with some face-to-face where the health protocols allow, as well as even print, video, television, radio, all of these come together. Focus 3 is looking at the psychosocial component, ensuring that health is considered as well, because the situation, because it is so new and because there are many psychological issues associated, have implications for the learning that children would really be able to demonstrate. And so it means that these cannot be forgotten. And in promoting engagement, focus area 4, we recognize that persons need proper messaging. We need to ensure that persons have a proper understanding of the expectations that we spoke about earlier and how best we can meet the needs. A very important initiative that the OECS Commission is partnering with a number of other agencies, it's called GIGA. It's an initiative to connect every school to the internet, and that project has already commenced. Essentially, we're looking at ensuring that when children have devices and that they have the tools to be able to connect, that online learning can happen because of connectivity as well. We have established 2 teams, a content development team and a continuity of learning team. The content development team is looking at evidence-based approaches to teaching and learning, and using that as a framework for developing materials that students and teachers, parents as well, can use with learning from home, so that it reduces the burden on the teachers. The continuity of learning team is developing a set of guidelines. It will become a manual for having learning continue regardless of any situation that may interrupt. So it goes way beyond the COVID situation, and it looks at any interruption to teaching and learning. The teams come from across the region, the content development team, as well as the continuity of learning team. And these education professionals work collaboratively on these activities. Here are some key principles, key considerations that the team used as a guide: constructivism, game-based learning, inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, so that while children are not in the physical classroom, the learning opportunities that they have would be high quality. They would develop creativity, they would develop critical thinking, they would be able to explore their world, and learning would be representative of exactly what we want it to be. There are some major projects that the teams are undertaking: learning from home, sustainable use of home resources. It's a video series where persons or parents would be able to see models of how they can engage with basic activities at home that provide opportunities for learning. It could be, for instance, that you're cooking with the child and you use resources from the cooking, you use the waste from the cooking in a kitchen garden as part of composting. So there are many opportunities for science learning, for English language learning, social studies. All of the areas can come together. We're also exploring tours and web-based games so that the experiences are meaningful. A very important highlight that has come out of the COVID response is the OECS ESI News. Essentially, students are prepared to develop reports on their experience, and they share those reports in an actual professional news broadcast. And here is just a quick feature of what that looks like. And finally, the key considerations, lessons, and insights coming out of that COVID-19 experience. These are the kinds of things that we've identified as focus areas, things that we must give attention to ensure that teaching and learning remain at the optimum, and that we create the policy environment to support the learning that students are expected to acquire. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gordon. We'll now move to our second presenter, Dr. Grace McLean, who is the Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Youth, Education, Youth and Information. Dr. McLean is an eminent educator, having served at different levels of the education system, including being the Chief Education Officer in the ministry prior to her current position. She has also worked with Hart NTA for many years as the Senior Programs Director. She holds a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Career and Technical Vocational Education, among other higher level qualifications. Dr. McLean.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Maxine Henry Wilson, our former Minister of Education and Commissioner of JTech, Dr. Canute Thompson and members of the CCEP team, members of this panel, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let me extend sincere appreciation to the CCEP team for extending an invitation for me to join this distinguished panel as we look broadly at educational policies and support systems throughout the region in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. There is no doubt, ladies and gentlemen, that the COVID-19 outbreak has disrupted education systems worldwide, and of course the Caribbean has been affected in a significant way. As a ministry, we continue to fly a plane in the air as we plan and implement programs with a fair degree of flexibility as we respond to the pandemic. So in early March, prior to the confirmation of the first COVID case in Jamaica, the ministry's team developed our Education in Emergency plan. This plan we circulated to all our schools, and we also provided additional financial support to assist our schools in procuring well-needed supplies for sanitization in keeping with the Ministry of Health and Wellness directives and guidance. So on March 12, when the Prime Minister announced the suspension of schools to mitigate the spread of the disease, this led to another round of adjustments as we sought to address continuing education for students, recognizing that some amount of educational opportunities would need to be provided while our students are out of school. We truly appreciated the great effort that our teachers made as it relates to this sudden change. we realized that they needed to be familiarized or more familiarized with the use of online methods, which we really did not have the time for the actual preparation. But somewhere during the process, we were able to introduce many of our teachers to the approaches to be used as it relates to online learning and specifically distance learning. The Education in Emergency Plan, which was developed, included some of these areas that I will mention now. The use of different online platforms, Google Suite, Schoolology, Edmodo, Zoom, Skype, as well as established school management platforms that the ministry was able to procure in very short period for our students, especially those at the primary level and at the examinations level at secondary, to benefit from. The rapid production of materials for radio and television, and we had almost all of our radio stations involved in some kind of educational programs for our students across the country to access. And importantly, the printing and distribution of material where there was no internet access. In addition, we were able to procure packages from our internet providers to assist our students, and also to secure other providers who are currently assisting our students in getting access. We also started, or we improved or rapidly improved the procurement and the acquiring and distribution of tablets to both teachers and students, and we are currently in that phase as we speak. We also provided nutritional grants, cash grants, for the last 3 months, and in early March we had to use our mechanism to provide baked products, milk and water to schools for parents to access for their children. Having gone through that period, ladies and gentlemen, we are now in the refresher phase of preparations. Schools reopened on June 8 for our examination students, which total about 129,000 students from grade 11 through to grade 13. Now, before we actually opened, we were engaged in active preparation as it relates to the training of our school administrators, and also in the procurement of materials, sanitizing materials, masks and temperature guns and so on were provided to all our high schools and most of our private institutions. We found that our schools administrators have risen to the challenge, and so the new seating matrix, staggering of classes, changing in terms of the timetable, a new approach in terms of the provision of meals, the constant or the regular disinfecting and cleaning of surfaces within our schools, the preparation of wash stations with soap and the necessary provision for our students, temperature checks, signage to guide our students in terms of social physical distancing, counseling support, isolation room, all the things that we were advised by the Ministry of Health, we were able to put in place. And we had our health inspectors actually assessing our schools and giving the clear before we were able to engage our students. Our school leaders actively participated in all the training exercises that we had with the Ministry of Health, and within a 1-week period with the technology, we were able to train close to 6,000 of our administrators. So this limited reopening of school, as you heard from our JTA president before, has gone very well, and we can only give the credit to our hardworking educators who continue to support this process. So the school term will officially end on July 3, and we will see our students moving into their examinations, which will effectively end somewhere around July 4. And then we will now move into the more active preparation for the start of the new school year, which I will spend a minute or two on to update you as to where we are at. So, ladies and gentlemen, the research has been done thanks to IDB, UNICEF, UNESCO, and the World Bank and other international development partners. We have identified an approach using the 6 feet distancing, and through partnerships, we believe we will be able to find enough space to accommodate our students, partnerships with churches, private schools, available spaces, and also the use of the wide expanse of lands that we have on some of our school compounds by the erection of tents and temporary structures. We already know that a mixed modality will be utilized, which will include the wide use of technology. Our schools have started to develop their reopening plans, and this is going exceptionally well. Mr. Speed spoke about the data earlier. We now know also that technology will form a part of the new normal, and so we have commenced the procurement of a national school management system that will see us being able to pull all that we do together. We expect that by the 1st to the 2nd week in July, we will have the full implementation plan ready for the dissemination to the system, but we have to clear and have all the consultations done before this plan can be made public. Extensive training is currently being arranged through the Jamaica Teaching Council, as well as the University of the West Indies Open Campus, among other partners. Our guest speaker actually spoke about what Finland is willing to support us on, and we look forward to that support as well. So we will take up the challenge of ensuring that our teachers are properly trained. Now, as I heard some of the speakers spoke about the nature of the teaching learning process that has taken place within the last 4 or so months, we had guided the system as well that they should limit the introduction of new concepts. We know that some regression would have taken place. And so for the first 3 weeks in September, we will be administering a special assessment in selected subject areas across the system to identify the gaps and to determine how these gaps will be filled as we move forward for the new school year. So, ladies and gentlemen, the ministry has been very responsive, and we can only give the credit to our hardworking educators across the length and breadth of Jamaica, who all came together and allowed the world and specifically the country to realize that teachers are our greatest assets. We have made some mistakes. We have corrected them along the way. We continue to correct some that we have made. And we are very optimistic that the opportunities that have been provided through the COVID-19 will serve this education system very well by providing greater equity and access, and of course, greater results and outcomes for our Jamaican children. Thank you.
For that very comprehensive review and our actions going forward. Mrs. Nicole Lynch is our next presenter. She's a registered counseling psychologist and a certified positive discipline educator, and her professional activities focus on child and youth mental health, parenting, and education reform. Over the last 10 years, she has been a consultant with organizations such as UNICEF and OECS on projects related to improving the psychosocial learning environment for children and adolescents, a topic which we have heard referred to frequently today and before. So, Mrs. Lynch?
Good morning, everyone. Protocol having been duly observed, I want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of the conversation on building resilient schools here in our precious Caribbean. I want to do so from the perspective of psychology and just what we know about what children need to do well and to be well. So I want to say that children have been experiencing significant challenges before COVID came along in terms of their mental health and their well-being. Here in the Caribbean in particular, we've had a significant challenge with child abuse. The research has shown us that sometimes for many children, that first sexual occurrence happens forced and it happens before the age of 10. So we recognize that there are pre-existing challenges that children and adolescents in the Caribbean have faced, but COVID-19 has also brought new challenges. It's also brought rapid, unprecedented change. There's so many times I've said to myself and to others in conversations, we've never been here before as a world. And change in and of itself often presents a challenge to our mental health. So psychologically speaking, we recognize that these challenges must be a part of the response from an education policy perspective, and they must be addressed holistically to ensure that the issues of social emotional intelligence are at the table when we look at how we help children to recover from the experiences of the past 6 months. So our children are going to need our help understanding what has happened. They'll need our help dealing with the challenges and the changes that have come up. They will need help healing and coping with the fear, the anxiety, the worries of the past 6 months, and the new worries to come when they go back to school, as some children may be, fearful of, well, I've been told to stay at home, but now I'm being told I need to go to school. Is it really safe? So much will need to be done to really ensure that we are meeting our children's social and emotional health. As I mentioned before, there were some pre-existing challenges that were being faced by our children in this region. Child abuse, I spoke to that in terms of the childhood sexual abuse. I also want to say that children in the early childhood area, in the early childhood ages, are also particularly vulnerable to child abuse. That 0 to 4 age group, international literature as well as literature in the Caribbean has said, that is a time of heightened risk of abuse. We recognize that stress, parental stress, is a key factor at times in child abuse, as well as, perhaps this is just how I have been trained and this is what I do. So with COVID coming along, we now have a situation where parents are extremely stressed because they have new roles. They're playing the role of teacher. They're also being expected in many cases to work from home and to be productive. Those expectations have not gone. So there are challenges also economically. And with this stress, there comes also the heightened possibility of increased levels of abuse. And even in those cases, as we are seeing from some research coming out of UNICEF, we've seen that parental views and attitudes towards the use of corporal punishment have changed, where parents are saying, we are now seeing there are other ways. But as we think about building resilient schools, we must consider that when these stresses come, sometimes regressions can also come in these gains that we have made. So with mental health challenges, we recognize that students, teachers, and families before COVID were having instances that led them to experience trauma. When I say trauma, I refer to anything that overwhelmed our capacity to cope. And I feel like COVID just personifies the capacity for people to feel trauma or traumatized. But that was with us before. We have children in the Caribbean region who are still traumatized by the hurricanes that they experienced in the past few years. When it rains, the teachers have to step in and really try to settle them and help them to calm. Past panelists also spoke about the poverty that has already been with us and the impact that can have on a learning brain, as well as the social and economic inequalities. The pressures of, well, my mommy or my daddy cannot give me this tablet that I need to do my work. And maybe I'm going to fall behind. Maybe I won't be able to reach those goals that I had set for myself that I thought would finally be a way out of the stress that my family faces through poverty. So we also have the new reality for some children, which poses a challenge. With children's development, socialization, and play, especially for young children, but I believe for all, we all need to play for our well-being. That has been challenged when we are continually hearing the important message of we have to social distance. So that, I think, has been a challenge. Children as well may be experiencing feelings of confusion, isolation, and lack of control, sadness, not really knowing what to do with what they're experiencing. I spoke to parental stress as well. So we have had some promising things that have given us hope. The Child Friendly Schools Initiative, which is being implemented in many schools as a result of the work of UNICEF and OECS, has, I think, much to offer for such a time as this. One of the countries, Antigua and Barbuda, has sought to continue to build on what they have, the gains they have through the implementation of the Child Friendly School Initiative, by recognizing that our parents are being stressed and they will need help in disciplining their children in a manner that reduces the likelihood of abuse. So they have launched a media campaign with ads targeting parents with skills that they can use in the home. We also have the Return to Happiness program, which existed pre-COVID, but which has recently been revised to ensure that teachers and parents now know how to implement the Return to Happiness program, which is a program which traditionally has been implemented after hurricanes to help children to cope with the trauma they may have experienced and return to some level of functioning with hope. So in terms of insights and lessons, I want to say that the time has come to seriously recognize the importance of social and emotional wellness for learning and as a fundamental aspect of quality education. Oftentimes, as I've done training with teachers, they said, well, Mrs. Lynch, this is good. We recognize this is important, but the curriculum, the exams, we don't have time. I think the time has come where we recognize that it is no longer a side dish, but it is a part of the main menu, as well as recognizing that for resilient schools to happen, we must have resilient teachers, resilient students, and resilient families. So I really recommend the promotion of a foundation of social and emotional wellness, as well as the promotion of social and emotional learning for students, encouraging avenues like student councils for students' voices to be heard, as well as integrating the social and emotional learning component in the curriculum. I think the opportunity that this presents with us to build community is really heartening, but it will be for us to take up and be creative to find ways that even in the midst of social distancing, that we really focus on the important work of building community and developing those systems which foster predictability and sustainability. I also want to really stress the importance of support for teachers in as many ways as possible. And one of the ways that teachers will really need support right now is understanding how they can support their own social and emotional health, as well as that of their students, through the integration of it, as well as helping them to understand impact, as well as how to respond. In terms of teachers' well-being, I encourage us to look at ways that we can invest in well-being support systems for teachers, maybe hotlines, mentoring support programs, as well as taking a very close look at how we can support parents. The reality is some parents just don't know how. So in an environment where it's so critical for them to know how to support their children, it will be important for schools, as they look at a whole school approach to dealing with COVID, to really have as a critical component parental engagement and support for parents. Finally, I want to say that in the long term, it will be important to invest in the availability and the coordination of social services to ensure, students have a continuum of services to meet their continuum of needs, as well as to continue to build on the gains of the Child Friendly School Initiative, which really seeks to ensure that all children, regardless of their needs, are able to access quality education through things like student voice, parental engagement, positive discipline. And I want to highly suggest that we review our behavioral policies to ensure that positive discipline is promoted, as we recognize this is a trauma-informed way of discipline. And looking at how we teach, recognizing that teaching must go beyond the walls now of the classroom, but it must also go beyond the speak, learn dichotomy. And finally, I would say that the time has come to really critically see the investment in creating trauma-sensitive learning environments, not as an option, but as a critical need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lynch. Very, very informative, very interesting. I'm sure we'll get some questions relating to this in our question and answer session. Now we're going to come to Mr. Christopher Daring, who has a regional stature as a corporate leader. He's here in his capacity as an entrepreneur with his latest venture, Ready TV and ReadyNet. And we've heard a lot about provision of infrastructure and he is pioneering Jamaica's first satellite-delivered internet service. Mr. Daring.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. First, I'd like to say I really appreciate the opportunity. Everybody seems to have a strong bent on the educational aspect of it, which is very, very important. But certainly one of the things that we've seen, if I just share my screen, is the fact that, you know, what COVID-19 has done is to truly expose not just the underbelly of weaknesses or strengths in the educational scenario, but it's also exposed the underbelly of our infrastructure across the Caribbean and certainly here in Jamaica. Jamaica's communication infrastructure has been seen to be wanting, and it has been a little bit unfair on civil servants like Dr. McLean, where you hear the public virtually clamoring on the Ministry of Education to try and solve the infrastructure problems that people individually are facing, whether access to internet and so on. So it's very important to understand the limitations of that, and certainly the situation has exposed itself in terms of the economic divide, which has led to the digital divide. Now, in this digital world, we've also seen very strong or huge gap between rural and urban societies and their access to information and access to the digital world. And we've also seen the limitations of technology. So, you know, internet is just not internet. So some people might have intermittent internet connectivity. Some people have permanent internet connectivity. Some people have higher broadband speeds, which allows them to access audiovisual content relatively cheaply. Some people have only access to mobile internet on a 3G or even a 2G basis. So clearly, when you say access to internet, you have to divide between whether you actually have the Ferrari, which is the high-speed broadband, versus a Mercedes-Benz, which is another form of internet that may be at a lower speed. But one of the also in digital world has also meant that we're becoming more and more exposed to terminology and technology that most of the country has not been exposed to before. So for instance, when we built the first digital broadcast network, people didn't quite understand the difference between broadcast and internet and the cost benefits that accrues from digitally broadcasting audiovisual content versus the internet. In broadcast world, we know you put up a tower, you broadcast, and it doesn't matter whether one person has on their television set or a billion people have on their television set. The cost is virtually the same, and essentially all the consumers is consuming in terms of cost is their electricity bill. So there are certain universal truths that we now have to accept. One is that economics drives investment, and so there's a very good reason, a very logical reason why urban communities tend to get much more of the infrastructure investment than rural communities. Secondly, you know, all countries in the Caribbean, in particular Jamaica, because of its size and topography, you need a matrix of digital solutions. You cannot expect that everybody's going to get the same type of internet. You can't expect that everybody's going to be able to afford it. So there's socioeconomic factors that are going to determine what type of internet connectivity that they're going to receive. There's a technology choice, so that, you know, that's going to be determined by the types of technology people are comfortable with using. There's topography, so there's certainly some areas of Jamaica that are only accessible, or certainly you can only serve through different types of technology, such as satellite up in the mountains or fiber in urban communities. Then we also have to accept that there's going to be an incredible capacity demand over the next couple of years. Jamaica and the Caribbean are not alone in terms of infrastructure weaknesses being exposed. And we saw it across the globe as the demand for internet exploded because of the stay-at-home scenario. So we are going to be, as a country and as a region, in competition for that investment capital, that capex, that infrastructure capacity for the internet, with countries, with regions like Latin America, which are much larger, much more attractive, so to speak, from a socioeconomic perspective because of their size. And so we have to recognize it. And so regulatory environment has to strongly recognize that. I'll give you a good example is that in Jamaica, we don't distinguish from a spectrum cost, for instance, between rural and urban. So you can put up a broadcast tower in the middle of Kingston and you pay the same spectrum fee, and that broadcast tower might serve, 500,000 people. And you put up a small gap filler in the mountains of Buff Bay Valley, serving maybe 50 people. And the Spectrum Management Authority will charge you the same amount of money for both towers. So it's almost a disincentive to invest in those rural communities. And these are kind of the underbelly that the COVID-19 pandemic has sort of exposed and brought to the front, so that we know regulators are now looking seriously at that to try and incentivize investors and communication operators to invest in the rural communities, invest in those areas that are just intrinsically very challenging to invest in. So one of the things we set out to do by developing the e-homeschool network in conjunction with the Ministry of Education is that we recognized that we had to utilize all distribution platforms across the country. So it doesn't matter whether it's fiber to the home or digital broadcast on the Red TV network or cable operators that are there, 4G LTE networks, microwave networks, Wi-Fi networks, and even our new satellite delivered internet network. Those are simply distribution platforms. And so we had to make sure that you have all distribution platforms being utilized for the delivery of the e-homeschool network, which is a series of 24/7 educational channels that are going to be broadcast, streamed, distributed across all of those networks, so that you're reaching virtually the affordability factor. So you have different types of access to those networks, whether it be a television set, whether it be a mobile phone, whether it be a tablet. It should not matter. You develop one set of content, educational content, that is then distributed across all platforms and then accessed by all types of instruments. So we always have to be dealing with affordability, availability, and access. Affordability, obviously, you have different socioeconomic groupings, and some people will be able to afford a 24/7 mobile data connectivity. Most people will not be able to. Some people have fixed internet in the home, will not be able to afford a monthly recurring bill to have fixed internet in the home. But some people have television. And I want to emphasize that, because when we talk about online, the E in e-learning actually stands for electronic. It doesn't stand for online. So you were really looking at all electronic forms of distribution. And there are lots of people that have television sets. In Jamaica, out of the 880,000 households, 800,000 have a television set. And it's, of course, the most cost-effective way to distribute content. So we wanted to make sure that that was available. So our end game is, of course, to have that content, educational content, a whole series of educational channels, whether it be vocational training, whether it be primary school, which we've started with, on e-classes being delivered live and delayed with interactivity across all of those platforms. And just to demonstrate the sort of importance of that, even this symposium is being broadcast live across the region, across Jamaica. It's being broadcast on cable, whether it be Flow or Digicel and Ready TV. It's being broadcast over the air on Ready TV. It's available on the internet and so on. So that just gives you an idea of what we're trying to achieve with the e-homeschool network. The content is important. It is being developed. They're both live and interactive classes. And when we also distribute it by streaming over the internet, if you do have that network in your area, then that is what will be used to access it. So it's very important we understand that there's a plethora of classrooms that are being developed. Each different type of classroom develops different lessons, whether it's primary school, secondary school. We even have universities coming to us to take distribution channels. to make sure that their students are going to be able to access those classes. The last thing I'd like to leave you with is that we need a whole regulatory approach. There are governments that are sitting on spectrum that they believe has a certain amount of value. But the truth is that the days when you expect major operators to come into the Caribbean, pay a lot of money for spectrum, and build out infrastructure, and try and recuperate that investment from post-COVID economies, those days are probably over for now. And we've seen examples in other countries where they're being very proactive to attract that capital. New Zealand, for instance, have just allocated that spectrum to operators and control them to build those networks, and they're penalized if they don't build the networks to serve the population. So we think here in the Caribbean, we have to be extra aggressive, in my view, to attract that investment that's needed to put internet in every school. I can tell you with our satellite service, that satellite that has been put up was not put up in circulating Earth to serve the Caribbean. It was launched to serve Latin America. We just happen to fall in that shadow, and so we can access some of that capacity. But if that capacity is going to be utilized in Latin America, the Caribbean is going to get left behind. And therefore, we need to do whatever is necessary to make sure that capacity stays within the Caribbean. We get our fair share of that capacity. And that is by having a very proactive regulatory environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daring. And now, Dr. Wayne Wesley, who is the Registrar and Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Examinations Council, his presentation will be done by a video that he has prepared, and then we can have him for question and answers. I'm going to ask Dr. Thompson immediately after Dr. Wesley's presentation to take over the question and answer section of this panel discussion. Thank you.
Good day, colleagues. Let me start by congratulating the Caribbean Center for Educational Planning for the vision to host this important webinar. The Caribbean Examinations Council is pleased to contribute to this regional discourse geared towards fostering the development of resilient education systems in the Caribbean. The Caribbean Examinations Council, an institution of CARICOM under the auspices of the Council for Human and Social Development Education, was established in 1972 under the agreement of 16 participating governments. The Council is empowered to conduct such examinations as deemed appropriate and award certificates and diplomas for such examinations. The transformation imperatives facing us as a region due to the challenges posed by COVID-19 include disruption to education process, system readiness, technological capacity. This has led to the imperatives: resilience, digital transformation, and educational imperatives, requiring policy formulation to include data, teacher education, and the delivery system, to support the education system with the right leadership, delivery mechanism, and infrastructure support. The resilience imperative. The critical challenge now facing regional economies is one of resilience. Sustaining meaningful economic activities during periods of natural disasters or health pandemic. An ability to mitigate the impact of these existential threats on developing economies for the region remains a top priority. The education system is one of the most critical activities of any economy, and this is so because it develops the most valuable asset of any country, its human capital. Therefore, crucial to the building of resilience to continue and sustain critical economic activities for development and growth requires an infrastructure revolution, the core of which is digital transformation. Digital transformation is not only vital, but crucial in fostering resilience. It is within this resilient environment that the critical function of developing the human capital through the teaching, learning, and assessment process will continue without disruption. Digital transformation is another imperative. Therese Turner-Jones, General Manager, IDB, gave the region a rating of 5 out of 10 with regards to readiness. She stated, and I quote, "We are not nearly as ready as we should be. We have mobile devices, millions in the region. However, we do not have as much digital use regarding services, government and private." End of quote. Thirdly, the education imperatives must be buttressed by digital transformation for access to be universal and inclusive, equity to be fair, quality to be standardized, and relevance to be applicable, thus creating a resilient environment. This transformation agenda is not without challenges, in particular, the infrastructure challenge to deal with internet penetration and the infrastructure cost. To support education imperatives, the delivery mechanism requires a digital infrastructure so that teaching, learning, and assessment would be supported by digital transformation so that teaching will provide designed experiences, simulations, and digitization of learning resources for online consumption to aid learning. Assessment that will see the utilization of performance reports through data portals with descriptive and predictive analytics to inform teaching. The deployment of e-testing systems in schools to provide familiarity and preparation for both teachers and students. The validation of outcomes in certifying competence and digital credentialing as an authentic representation of certification. CHC has embarked on an e-strategy encompassing 1, the e-learning hub, which allows for the provision of a single collaborative and engaging space online to access digital and other resources to support teaching, learning, and assessment. 2, e-testing, which allows for automation of the test development cycle and the online delivery of tests. 3, e-marking, which allows for digitization of the marking process and improved quality control and monitoring capabilities. E-certification, which allows for dissemination of digital credentials. This transformation requires a robust policy infrastructure to support the educational imperatives of access, equity, quality, and relevance, with policies such as instructional policies, learning policies, assessment policies, and digital policies. In addition, critical support systems are needed to include psychosocial support systems, technological support systems, infrastructure support systems, and technical resource support system. Accordingly, what is required is the reorientation of our leadership mindset, nationally and regionally, to the 21st century imperative for digital transformation as a key resilience strategy for the region. The future of work is constantly redefining the construct of economic activities requiring an agile education system to respond effectively. Galvanizing crucial government, private sector, and development partner support in committing the requisite resources, financial, regulatory, and technical, towards building a resilient regional education system for greater inclusivity and sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and may God bless you.